Wife left in arid desert. Decades later built fortune with fish. Margaret Thompson always believed that marriage would be her salvation, but she never imagined it would also be her greatest trial. At 26 years old, 3 months pregnant, she saw her world collapse when she found only a letter on the kitchen table and the distant sound of her husband's truck driving away forever. It was when she tried to run after him that she realized the cruel reality. Richard had taken not only his clothes, but also all the money they had saved for the baby's arrival. The letter was short and direct, without detours or elaborate excuses. "Margaret, I can no longer support a family. You'll have to manage on your own. My mother's house is yours now. Richard." She reread the words so many times that the letters began to dance before her eyes, blurred by tears. There she was, in the middle of the Arizona desert, on a property she barely knew, without a penny in her pocket, and with a baby growing in her womb. The simple 3-room house was 15 kilometers from the nearest town, St. Benedict Springs. The arid land stretched for several hectares, but Margaret had never paid attention to the property's details during the few visits they had made to her mother-in-law, Mrs. Dorothy, who had passed away just 2 months prior. In the first days, Margaret searched every drawer, every corner of the house, hoping to find some money forgotten by her mother-in-law. All she found were a few coins lost between old cushions and a cookie tin with only crumbs. Desperation began to tighten its grip when she realized she didn't even have rice to cook. It was then that she went out to explore the property in search of some miraculous solution. The scorching sun beat down on her back as she walked among the rocks and dry vegetation. Dorothy had never spoken much about the details of the land, always changing the subject when her son asked about possible improvements. Margaret discovered the reason for this evasion when she stumbled upon some poorly stacked stones near a small embankment. Behind the stones, hidden like a well-kept secret, was a medium-sized pond with crystal-clear water that reflected the blue sky. Her heart raced with joy and relief. The water was teeming with small silver fish swimming in schools. Margaret had never fished in her life, always depending on her husband for everything. But hunger and desperation are quick teachers. She tried to catch the fish with her hands, plunging her arms into the cool water, but they slipped through her fingers like liquid mercury. Sitting at the edge of the pond, Margaret began to cry in frustration when she heard footsteps approaching. Her heart raced with fear until she saw the stooped figure of Mr. Walter, a white-haired neighbor who lived a few kilometers away. "Miss, are you all right?" he asked, taking his leather hat off his head. Margaret tried to wipe her tears and compose a dignified response, but the words came out choked. "My husband left me, Mr. Walter. I'm pregnant and have no money. Trying to catch these fish, but I can't catch any." The elderly man shook his head with understanding. He had seen many similar dramas throughout his 70 years of life in the desert. "Let me teach you, girl, you don't catch fish in a hurry. You need patience and skill." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. Mr. Walter returned the next day with an improvised fishing rod made of bamboo and nylon line. He taught Margaret to prepare bait with worms they found under damp stones. The first fishing trip lasted hours, but she managed to catch 3 small fish that were barely enough for one meal. "You have to have persistence, girl. The desert doesn't give anything away for free, but those with willpower always find a way to survive." Margaret absorbed every word from the old fisherman as if they were sacred lessons. She needed to learn fast, because her belly grew each day, and the morning sickness made everything more difficult. In the following days, Margaret began waking before dawn to fish. She discovered the fish were more active in the early morning hours, when the sun hadn't yet warmed the water. But a new problem arose: how to preserve the caught fish in the scorching heat of the Arizona desert, without a refrigerator or any method of refrigeration. Mr. Walter suggested she smoke the fish, a technique his father had taught him decades ago. They built a small structure of wood and stones, where Margaret could hang the fish over a low fire for hours. The process was slow and required constant attention, but it worked. The first smoked fish Margaret tasted had a flavor unlike anything she had ever experienced. The firm, tasty meat filled her with renewed hope. If she could catch enough, she might even be able to sell some fish in town to buy other basic foods. The walk to St. Benedict Springs took nearly 3 hours on foot under the strong sun. Margaret made this journey twice a week, carrying a bag with some smoked fish to sell at the local market. At first, the vendors mocked her. "Well, look who's here, the fish lady. How are you going to support a child selling these little things?" shouted Mrs. Bertha, a stout merchant who dominated the fish market at the fair. Margaret felt her face burn with shame, but she swallowed her pride and kept offering her products to the few customers who stopped at her makeshift stall. Some tried it out of curiosity and were surprised by the distinct flavor. "This fish is very tasty, young lady. Where did you get it?" asked an elegant woman who had stopped to try it. "I catch and smoke them on my property, ma'am. It's a method I learned from a neighbor," replied Margaret, trying to sound more confident than she felt. The woman bought 3 fish and said she'd be back the following week. This small victory gave Margaret new spirit, and she returned home determined to improve her technique. During one of her morning fishing trips, Margaret noticed something interesting. The fish seemed to reproduce more quickly at certain times of the year, and she began to observe patterns in their behavior. Some plants that grew at the edge of the pond attracted more fish when she threw them in the water. Experimenting with different types of local vegetation, Margaret discovered that a mixture of young mandakaru leaves and umbuzero seeds made the fish grow faster and taste better. She didn't understand the science behind it, but the results were undeniable. The 5th month of pregnancy brought new complications. Margaret began to feel back pain that made the long walks to town almost unbearable. The local midwife, Mrs. Ruth, said she needed more rest. But how could she rest when each day without a sale meant hunger? It was during one of these painful walks that Margaret met Charles Anderson, a fish merchant who came from the capital, Phoenix, looking for new suppliers to stock big city restaurants. "Are you the smoked fish lady everyone's talking about?" he asked, getting out of his pickup truck. Margaret confirmed with a nod, trying to hide the pain in her back. Charles tasted a piece of the fish she was carrying, and his eyes widened in surprise. "This flavor is unique. I've never eaten smoked fish like this. What kind of fish is this?" "They're trahira from my property's pond. I use local plants for feed and a special smoking method." "Listen here, miss. I'll buy your entire weekly production for double the price you sell at the market, but it needs to be a good quantity, you hear? At least 20 kilos per week." Margaret felt her heart race. 20 kilos per week was far more than she currently produced, but it also represented an income that could completely change her situation. "I accept, Mr. Charles. I just need some time to increase production." They sealed the deal with a handshake. Margaret returned home with a mix of joy and worry. How could she catch and smoke 20 kilos of fish per week alone and pregnant? The answer came through Mr. Walter, who offered to help in exchange for a small percentage of the profits. Together they built 2 more smoking structures and significantly increased production. The 7th month of pregnancy arrived along with a severe drought that hit the entire region. Many ponds dried up completely, but Margaret's, fed by an underground spring she hadn't yet discovered, maintained a good water level. This drew unwanted attention. A group of local ranchers, led by Colonel Howard Patterson, appeared at Margaret's property, claiming the pond water was a community resource and that she couldn't monopolize the fishing. "Young lady, that water there isn't just yours. Everyone in this region has the right to fish here," declared the colonel, a robust man with a grey mustache. Margaret was alone at the time of the visit as Mr. Walter had gone to town. She felt fear, but also a deep anger at the injustice of the situation. "Colonel, with all due respect, this property belongs to my family. My husband inherited it from his mother, and now it's my responsibility." "Your family? Where's your husband? I don't see any man around here." The question hurt like a stab, but Margaret maintained her composure. "My husband is away on business. I'm taking care of the property in his absence." The colonel laughed scornfully. "A woman alone can't take care of land in the Arizona desert. You'd better sell this property to someone who understands the business." Margaret firmly replied that she had no interest in selling, but she realized those men wouldn't easily accept her refusal. They left that day, but she knew they'd be back. That night, Margaret could barely sleep, thinking about the confrontation. For the first time since Richard had left, she felt true fear. It wasn't just her safety at stake, but also that of the baby she carried. The next morning, Mr. Walter noticed her worry, and she told him about the rancher's visit. "Those men have always been like that, girl. They think they can take whatever they want just because they have money and influence. But you have rights, and I know someone who can help." Walter introduced her to attorney Michael Stevens, a young lawyer who had recently returned to the region after graduating in the capital. Michael was interested in Margaret's case, both because of the injustice of the situation and the determination she showed. "Mrs. Margaret, I'll need to see all the property documents to ensure your rights are legally protected." Sifting through the papers Mrs. Dorothy had left, Margaret discovered the documentation was complete and that the property had water rights she didn't even know existed. There was a larger spring downstream that also belonged to the land. Attorney Michael explained that these water rights were extremely valuable, especially during drought periods. Margaret began to understand her property was worth much more than she had imagined. The 8th month of pregnancy brought the birth of Grace, a small but healthy girl who was born with the help of Mrs. Ruth during a rare rainy dawn. Margaret looked at her daughter in her arms and promised she would never face the hardships they had endured. The first weeks with the baby were challenging. Margaret tried to balance caring for the child and maintaining the fish production. Mr. Walter helped as much as he could, but he himself was elderly and had limitations. Grace was a calm child, but Margaret noticed her own milk wasn't being enough. The midwife suggested she eat more protein, especially fish, to increase her milk production. Ironically, the solution was right in front of her. Margaret intensified fishing for her own consumption and noticed a significant improvement in her health and milk production. Grace began to gain weight properly. During this period, Margaret made an accidental discovery that would change everything. By throwing food scraps near the pond, she noticed that certain food combinations made the fish reproduce faster and grow larger. She began to systematically experiment with different types of natural feed. Forage palm leaves mixed with corn bran created a food the fish loved. The pond population grew exponentially. With more fish available, Margaret managed to increase her production to 30 pounds per week. Charles was impressed with the consistency and quality of the product and raised the price he paid. Dear listener, if you are enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we are just starting out. Now continuing, success brought new challenges. Margaret needed more smoking structures and additional help. She hired Mary Grace, a widowed woman from the area who needed work, to help with processing the fish and caring for Grace during fishing trips. Mary was a dedicated worker and quickly learned the smoking techniques Margaret had developed. Together they created an efficient system that allowed them to process large quantities of fish while maintaining quality. But the growth of the business also attracted more unwanted attention. Colonel Howard returned, this time accompanied by other ranchers, and a man who introduced himself as a city inspector. "Young lady, we've come to find out if you have a license to raise fish commercially. This type of activity requires authorization from the city," said the supposed inspector. Margaret immediately suspected this was intimidation. Attorney Michael had explained that small subsistence farms didn't need special licenses, especially on private rural properties. "I have all the property documents in order, and my activity is within the law," replied Margaret, trying to sound more confident than she felt. The colonel interfered impatiently. "Stop stalling, girl. Everyone knows you're alone here. Sell this property and leave before something happens that you'll regret." The veiled threat made Margaret's blood boil. She looked at Grace, who was sleeping peacefully in Mary's arms, and felt a strength she didn't know she possessed. "Colonel, I'm not going anywhere. This is my home, this is my land, and these are my fish. If you want anything, talk to my lawyer." The men left, displeased, but Margaret knew the situation was far from over. That night, she and Mary found several stones thrown near the smoking structures, a clear message of intimidation. Attorney Michael suggested that Margaret document all intimidation attempts and managed to contact the state police to register the threats. He also discovered that the supposed city inspector was actually a henchman of the colonel, without any official authority. Determined to protect her business and her daughter, Margaret decided to expand her operations in a way that would make it harder for anyone to harm her. She used part of the profits to better fence the property and install a basic security system. She also began building stronger relationships with other merchants and customers in the region. The more people knew about and depended on her products, the harder it would be for anyone to harm her without consequences. An unexpected event accelerated this process. During a fair in St. Benedict Springs, Margaret met Daniel Roberts, chef and owner of a restaurant in Tucson, who was looking for unique regional ingredients. Daniel tried Margaret's smoked fish and was ecstatic. "This is exactly the kind of product I've been looking for. The flavor is authentic, regional, different from anything I find with conventional suppliers." He proposed an exclusive contract to supply 5 restaurants in the chain he was expanding throughout the region. The proposal meant doubling production again, but it also guaranteed a financial stability Margaret had never dreamed of. To meet the new demand, Margaret had to make significant investments. She expanded the pond, built new smoking structures, and hired 2 more assistants from the local community. The expansion project brought surprising discoveries. While excavating to enlarge the pond, Margaret found evidence of a spring much larger than she had imagined. The water sprang from an underground rock formation that fed not only her pond, but also influenced the water level of the entire region. Attorney Michael explained that this discovery further strengthened Margaret's water rights, but it also made her an even bigger target for those who wanted to control the region's water resources. The situation reached a peak when Margaret discovered that someone had tried to poison her pond overnight. Mary found small dead fish on the water's surface on a Monday morning. Fortunately, the amount of poison had not been enough to contaminate the entire pond, but the message was clear. Margaret felt genuine fear for the first time since she had started the business. She was no longer dealing only with intimidation, but with real attempts to sabotage her livelihood. Attorney Michael suggested she seek help from the state authorities, but Margaret knew that would take time, and she needed immediate protection. It was then that Mr. Walter suggested an unexpected solution. "Young lady, you need to form an alliance with other people who also have problems with these folks. United, you become stronger." The suggestion led Margaret to meet other small producers in the region who were also under pressure from large ranchers. Together, they formed an informal cooperative to protect each other and share resources. The union worked better than Margaret had imagined. When Colonel Howard tried to pressure one of the cooperative members, all the others mobilized in his defense. The group's strength discouraged new attempts at intimidation. Grace was completing her first year when Margaret received a proposal that would definitively change her situation. A businessman in the food industry from Phoenix had heard about her products through Daniel, the chef, and wanted to discuss the possibility of distributing the smoked fish throughout the entire Southwest region. The meeting took place at Daniel's restaurant in Tucson. The businessman, Mr. William Henderson, was an experienced man who knew the regional market well. "Mrs. Margaret, your product has the potential to become a recognized brand throughout the Southwest, but for that, we would need to standardize production and guarantee a constant supply of large quantities." The proposal was tempting, but Margaret was worried about losing control over her operation. She asked for time to think and discuss the details with Attorney Michael. The lawyer analyzed the proposed contract and identified several problematic clauses that could harm Margaret in the long run. He suggested counter-proposals that would better protect her interests. The negotiations stretched on for weeks. Margaret learned a lot about commercial contracts and copyrights for production methods. Attorney Michael guided her on how to protect her exclusive fish feeding and smoking techniques. Finally, they reached an agreement that satisfied both parties. Margaret would retain total control over production on her property, but would license her techniques to other production units to be established in the region under her supervision. The contract guaranteed Margaret royalties on all sales, in addition to the direct profit from her own production. It was more money than she had ever dreamed of earning. With financial success secured, Margaret could finally realize some personal dreams. She built a larger, more comfortable house on the property, installed electricity and running water, and created a suitable environment for Grace to grow up in. She also invested in her own education. She hired a private tutor to learn to read and write better, as she realized she needed these skills to manage a growing business. Grace was developing into an intelligent and curious child. At 2 years old, she was already showing interest in the fish and liked to accompany her mother in the property's activities. Margaret began to think about her daughter's future and decided to create an educational fund to ensure Grace could study wherever she wanted when the time came. The 3rd year of operation brought an unexpected twist. During a routine visit to the property, Mr. William noticed something Margaret hadn't: the exceptional quality of the pond water. "Mrs. Margaret, have you tested the mineral composition of this water? I have a feeling there's something special here that contributes to the unique flavor of the fish." The suggestion led Margaret to commission a technical analysis of the water. The results revealed a rare mineral composition, with high levels of trace elements, that were beneficial for both the fish and human consumption. This discovery opened a new business possibility: marketing the water itself as a premium product. Margaret began studying the feasibility of bottling and selling the spring water. Attorney Michael warned her about the legal implications of selling mineral water. It would be necessary to register the brand, obtain specific licenses, and invest in filtration and bottling equipment. Margaret decided to proceed with the water project as a natural extension of her businesses. She used some of the profits from the fish to set up a small bottling plant on the property. The launch of Grace Mineral Water, named after her daughter, was an immediate success. The story behind the brand, a single mother who turned adversity into opportunity, resonated with many consumers. The business diversification brought additional stability. Even if one product had seasonal problems, the other could compensate. Margaret was building a solid commercial empire. Grace was 4 years old when something happened that Margaret had never expected. Richard came back. He appeared at the property on a Saturday afternoon, driving a used but tidy car, wearing expensive but wrinkled clothes. Margaret was supervising production when Mary came running to tell her. "Mrs. Margaret, there's a man out front saying he's little Grace's father, says he's your husband." Margaret's heart raced, but not from joy or longing. It was pure anger. She walked to the property entrance where Richard waited, obviously impressed by the improvements he saw. "Margaret, you look so well. And the property, and wow, how everything has changed." Margaret stared at him coldly, not returning his greeting. "What do you want here, Richard?" He seemed uncomfortable with the cold reception. "I came to see how you both are. Grace is my daughter too, Margaret. I have a right to know her." "A right?" Margaret laughed bitterly. "What right do you think you have after abandoning us when we needed you most?" Richard tried to justify himself. "I was out of work, Margaret. I couldn't support a family. I left to find better conditions, and now I've come back to get you." "Get us? Do you think you can just come back and find everything as you left it?" Grace came running from the back of the property, a blonde, blue-eyed girl radiating health and happiness. She stopped when she saw the stranger talking to her mother. "Mommy, who is this man?" Margaret felt her heart tighten. This was the question she had feared since Grace had started to talk. "Grace, this is—" Margaret hesitated, looking at Richard, who waited anxiously. "This is Richard, an acquaintance of Mommy's." The answer clearly hurt Richard, but Margaret was not interested in sparing him. "Margaret, we need to talk in private," he said. "We have nothing to talk about. You made your choice 5 years ago. Now live with the consequences." Richard did not give up easily. He came back in the following days, always with gifts for Grace and promises of a better life. "Margaret, I saw what you built here. It's impressive. But imagine what we could do together. I learned a lot in these years away. I have experience with sales and marketing." Margaret laughed at his audacity. "You want to benefit from what I built with my own sweat and blood? While you were learning, I was here raising our daughter alone, sleeping on the kitchen floor because I didn't even have money for a mattress." Margaret's words were loaded with all the bitterness accumulated over the years. Richard insisted he had changed, that he wanted to be a present father and a true companion. But Margaret saw through the sweet words. He was interested in the financial success, not the family. The situation became tense when Richard started talking to Grace directly, trying to win his daughter's affection with toys and candy. Grace, innocent but intuitive, sensed the tension between the adults and began asking difficult questions. "Mommy, why do you get sad when Richard comes here? Is he bad?" Margaret found herself facing the dilemma of how to explain the situation without psychologically harming her daughter. "Grace, my dear, do you remember when I told you your daddy had to travel when you were a baby? Well, Richard is your daddy, but he was away for a very long time, and now Mommy needs to think if it's a good idea for him to come back to our family." Grace absorbed the information with the seriousness that only children can demonstrate. "If he's my daddy, why didn't he come back sooner? I always wanted to have a daddy like the other kids." The innocent question broke Margaret's heart. She had always tried to compensate for the paternal absence with double the love, but she knew there was a void in Grace's life. Attorney Michael advised Margaret about Richard's parental rights. Technically, as the biological father, he could claim legal visitation, but the initial abandonment complicated the situation. "Mrs. Margaret, you have several legal arguments in your favor, but perhaps it's better to try to resolve this without involving the courts, especially considering Grace's well-being." Margaret decided to set clear conditions for any involvement of Richard in Grace's life. "If you really want to be a father, you'll have to prove you've changed. No sporadic visits or empty promises. Either you truly commit, or you leave Grace alone." Richard agreed to the conditions, but Margaret remained skeptical. She knew her ex-husband's emotional instability well. During the following weeks, Richard visited Grace regularly, and Margaret had to admit that he seemed genuinely interested in getting to know his daughter. Grace began to warm up to her father's presence, and Margaret found herself torn between protecting her daughter from possible new disappointment and allowing her to experience a paternal relationship. The situation became complicated when Richard began suggesting changes to the property's routine. "Margaret, you're working too hard. With my help, we could optimize production and have more time for the family." Margaret suspected his intentions. "Richard, I built all of this without your help. Why do you think I need it now?" "It's not that you need it, Margaret, but we are a family. What's yours is also mine, isn't it?" The statement confirmed Margaret's worst suspicions. Richard was interested in the material assets, not in genuine family reconciliation. Margaret decided to test his true intentions. "Richard, if you really want to come back to our family, I'll make a proposal. You stay here, help with the work, but without receiving any money for 6 months. I want to see if your interest is genuine." Richard was visibly bothered by the proposal. "Margaret, that's not fair. I have expenses, responsibilities. How will I support myself without an income?" "The same way I supported myself when you abandoned me, pregnant and without money." Margaret's reply was dry and definitive. Richard tried to argue, but realized he wasn't able to manipulate the situation as he had hoped. That night he disappeared again, leaving only a note for Grace saying he needed to take care of some business and would be back soon. Grace cried for days, asking when her father would return. Margaret felt renewed anger at Richard's irresponsibility, who had once again put his own interests above his daughter's well-being. "Mommy, did I do something wrong? Why did Daddy leave again?" Margaret hugged her daughter tightly, trying to find words to explain the situation without hurting her further. "Grace, my love, you didn't do anything wrong. Sometimes adults make decisions that aren't about the children, they're about themselves. Daddy has problems he needs to solve on his own." The experience with Richard reinforced Margaret's determination to protect Grace from future disappointments. She decided to seek psychological help for her daughter to process the situation of the absent father. The child psychologist, Dr. Jennifer, explained that children are resilient but need age-appropriate honesty to process parental abandonment. "Mrs. Margaret, it's important that Grace understands that her father's absence is not her fault, but also not to create false expectations about a possible return." Margaret learned to talk with Grace about the situation in a way that made the girl feel safe and loved, regardless of her father's presence or absence. Grace, showing a precocious maturity, began to ask less about her father and to focus more on the property activities she loved. "Mommy, when I grow up, I'm going to help you with the fish and the water. We'll work together." Grace's declaration filled Margaret with pride and hope. Her daughter was growing up strong and determined, despite the difficult circumstances. The business continued to prosper. The Grace brand of mineral water gained regional recognition, and the smoked fish became a benchmark for quality throughout the Southwest. Margaret decided to expand further, opening a small processing plant that employed 12 people from the local community. She became one of the region's main employers. The success brought public recognition. Margaret was invited to speak at events about female rural entrepreneurship and sustainability. During one of these lectures, in Phoenix, Margaret met Sarah Anderson, a biologist specialized in aquaculture, who was interested in the unique methods Margaret had developed. "Mrs. Margaret, you have intuitively developed techniques that are considered advanced in aquaculture science. It would be interesting to document these methods so they can be scientifically replicated." Sarah's proposal led to an unexpected partnership. She spent several weeks at Margaret's property studying and documenting her techniques. The research results revealed that Margaret had created a unique sustainable aquaculture system that combined traditional knowledge from the Arizona desert with practical innovation. Sarah proposed publishing the results in scientific journals, with Margaret as co-author. It was academic recognition for methods Margaret had developed out of pure necessity and observation. The scientific publication brought a new wave of recognition. Margaret received invitations to participate in international conferences on sustainability and aquaculture. Grace, now 7 years old, showed growing interest in the scientific aspects of fish farming. She asked sophisticated questions that impressed Sarah. "Mrs. Margaret, your daughter has a natural potential for biological sciences. It would be interesting to encourage her in that direction." Margaret began investing in Grace's formal education, enrolling her in a private school in Tucson, where she could have access to better teaching. The routine changed significantly. Margaret drove Grace to school every morning and picked her up in the late afternoon. It was a sacrifice in terms of time, but an investment in her daughter's future. Grace adapted quickly to the new school and excelled especially in science and math. Her teachers commented on her natural curiosity and capacity for observation. During school vacations, Grace would again spend the whole day at the property, accompanying Margaret in activities and conducting her own experiments with small groups of fish. "Mommy, I think if we put different plants in the water, the fish might get different colors too." Grace's observations, though simple, demonstrated early scientific thinking. Margaret encouraged these experiments as a way to develop her daughter's interest in science. Sarah continued visiting the property regularly, guiding both Margaret and Grace in small research projects. The 8th year of operation brought a proposal that would test all of Margaret's principles. A multinational food industry company offered to buy her entire business for an amount that would make her an instant millionaire. The proposal included keeping Margaret as a consultant, but she would lose direct control over the production and methods she had developed. Margaret asked for time to consider. It was a decision that would affect not only her future, but also Grace's and that of all the people she employed in the region. Attorney Michael advised caution. "Mrs. Margaret, it's a considerable amount, but you must think about what you truly want for your life and for Grace's life." Margaret talked to Grace about the possibility, adapting the language so an 8-year-old could understand the implications. "Mommy, if we sell our fish house, what will we do?" "We could do other things. Travel. You could study anywhere in the world." Grace thought for a few moments. "But I like it here, Mommy. I like the fish, the crystal clear water, Mr. Walter. If we leave here, who will take care of everything we built?" Grace's question touched the core of Margaret's concerns. Selling would mean abandoning not just a business, but an entire community that had grown around her activities. Margaret decided to refuse the multinational's offer, but proposed an alternative, licensing her techniques to other regions while maintaining total control over her original operation. The counteroffer was accepted, and Margaret achieved the best of both worlds, financial security through royalties and maintaining her lifestyle and values. Grace was radiant with the decision. "Mommy, now we can help other people make tasty fish in other places too." The prospect of using her knowledge to help other rural producers excited Margaret as much as the financial security. Dear listener, If you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing, the expansion through licensing proved even more profitable than Margaret had imagined. Within 2 years, her techniques were being used in 12 US states, generating substantial royalties. Margaret used part of these resources to create a foundation dedicated to teaching sustainable aquaculture to vulnerable rural families. The Grace Foundation, named in honor of her daughter, offered free courses and technical support for small producers who wanted to start fish farming on their properties. The foundation's first course was offered on Margaret's own property. 20 families from the region participated in the 2-week training. Seeing other women learning the techniques she had developed out of necessity filled Margaret with deep satisfaction. She was multiplying opportunities for people in situations similar to what she had faced. Grace, now 10 years old, actively participated in the Foundation's courses, helping to demonstrate basic techniques for the participants' children. "Grace has a natural talent for teaching," commented one of the participants. "She explains things in a way even children can understand." Margaret realized her daughter was developing leadership and communication skills that would be valuable in any career she chose. The 10th year marks an important turning point. Margaret turned 36 and decided it was time to think strategically about the long-term future. Grace was excelling academically and showing a growing interest in marine biology. Margaret began investigating educational programs that could prepare Grace for a scientific career if she so chose. During a science fair at Grace's school, Margaret met Professor Daniel Mitchell, a retired marine biologist who had returned to the region to develop conservation projects. Professor Daniel was interested in the work Margaret and Grace were developing on the property. "Mrs. Margaret, you've created a model of sustainable aquaculture here that could be studied and scientifically replicated. It would be interesting to develop more in-depth research." The suggestion led to a new partnership. Professor Daniel began mentoring Grace on scientific initiation projects during school vacations. Grace absorbed the scientific knowledge with enthusiasm, always connecting theory with the practices she observed on her mother's property. "Professor Daniel, why do Mum's fish grow faster than the fish in the books?" Grace asked during one of the lessons. "That's an excellent question, Grace. Your mother developed techniques that haven't been fully studied by formal science yet." Grace's questions inspired Professor Daniel to propose a formal research project on Margaret's methods, this time with the participation of a state university. The university research brought scientists from different fields to study the property. Biologists, chemists, and environmental engineers became interested in different aspects of the system Margaret had created. Preliminary results indicated that Margaret had intuitively developed a system that maximized productivity while minimizing environmental impact, something formal science was still trying to achieve. Margaret found herself in a unique position, a woman without formal education being recognized by scientists as an innovator in her field. The university proposed establishing a permanent experimental station on the property, which would bring additional resources and scientific prestige. Margaret accepted the proposal but set conditions that protected her autonomy and guaranteed benefits for the local community. Grace, now 12 years old, was definitively headed for a scientific career. She spoke naturally about water pH, reproductive cycles, and biomass like other children talked about games. Margaret decided it was time to provide broader experiences for Grace. They took their first international trip to an aquaculture conference in Colorado. The trip was revealing for both. Grace saw that her mother's knowledge was valued internationally, while Margaret realized how her techniques could positively impact rural communities in other countries. At the conference, Margaret presented a paper on sustainable aquaculture in arid regions based on her personal experience. The presentation was received with great interest, especially by researchers from African and Asian countries facing climatic challenges similar to the Arizona desert. Margaret received invitations to collaborate on international projects, opening perspectives she had never imagined when she started fishing with her hands in the hidden pond. Back in the United States, Margaret decided to write a book documenting her journey and the techniques she had developed. The project had the collaboration of Professor Daniel and Sarah for the technical aspects. Grace contributed to the book by creating illustrations that explained complex concepts in a simple and accessible way. The book From Tears to Lake, A Sustainability Journey in the Desert, became a regional bestseller and was adopted as teaching material in rural extension courses. The book's revenue was entirely donated to the Grace Foundation, allowing a significant expansion of the training programs. Margaret set an ambitious goal. By the time Grace turned 18, the foundation should have trained 1,000 families in sustainable aquaculture. The goal seemed bold, but the accelerated growth of the programs indicated it was achievable. In the 13th year, Margaret faced a significant personal challenge. Mr. Walter, who had been a mentor and fundamental support from the beginning, fell seriously ill. Margaret found herself caring for the elderly man, who had been like a father to her. She secured resources for quality medical treatment and spent months dividing her time between the business and caring for Mr. Walter. The experience made her reflect on the importance of human relationships beyond professional success. She realized that her greatest wealth was in the people she had positively impacted over the years. Mr. Walter partially recovered, but had to drastically reduce his activities. Margaret kept him on the property as an advisor, respecting his experience and preserving his dignity. Grace, now a teenager, showed exceptional maturity in helping care for Mr. Walter, developing a sense of social responsibility that Margaret considered fundamental. The 14th year brought official recognition from the federal government. Margaret received a merit medal for contributions to sustainable rural development. The ceremony took place in Washington, with national authorities in attendance. Grace accompanied her mother, proud to see the public recognition of her mother's work. During the event, Margaret met other rural entrepreneurs who had transformed local realities through innovation and persistence. Conversations with these entrepreneurs inspired Margaret to think on an even larger scale. She began to articulate a national network of sustainable producers. The Sustainable Aquaculture Network of America was officially founded in the 15th year, with Margaret as founding president. The network connected producers, researchers, and support organizations, creating a national movement toward more sustainable practices. Grace, now 15, actively participated in the network's activities, showing leadership skills that impressed experienced adults. "That girl has a bright future ahead of her," Professor Daniel would often remark. "She combines technical knowledge with social sensitivity so naturally." Margaret began to think seriously about succession in the business. Grace showed interest and competence, but Margaret wanted to ensure her daughter had the freedom to choose her own path. A frank conversation with Grace revealed that the teenager was torn between pursuing an independent scientific career or gradually taking over the family business. "Mum, I love everything we've built here, but I also want to study the ocean, learn about other forms of aquatic life. Do you think I can do both?" Margaret smiled, recognizing in her daughter the same determination that had taken her far. "Grace, you can be anything you want to be. If you decide to take over our business, it will be because you chose to, not out of obligation." The conversation strengthened the relationship between mother and daughter, establishing a solid foundation for future decisions. The 16th year was marked by international expansion. Margaret established partnerships to implement her techniques in rural communities of New Mexico and Nevada. The international projects brought unique challenges, requiring adaptation of the techniques to different climatic and cultural conditions. Grace participated in one of the missions to New Mexico, translating technical concepts for local youth and observing variations in the applied methods. The international experience broadened Grace's perspective on career possibilities that combined science and social impact. Margaret realized her daughter was becoming a global citizen, capable of working anywhere in the world, yet with solid roots in the desert where she was born. The success of the international projects caught the attention of global development organizations. Margaret received an invitation to join a UN committee on sustainable aquaculture. The appointment represented the ultimate recognition of her journey. The woman who had started fishing out of desperation was now advising on global policies. Grace accompanied her mother on a trip to New York for the committee's first meeting. The experience at the UN headquarters was transformative for the teenager. "Mom, it's incredible how your ideas can help people all over the world. You've really changed so many lives." Margaret reflected on her daughter's observation. She had started out just trying to survive, but ended up creating a movement that transcended her personal needs. The 17th year brought an unexpected turn of events. Richard returned once more, but this time accompanied by a lawyer, demanding paternal recognition and rights over Grace's education. The situation was delicate because Grace, now 17, was close to adulthood and had her own opinions about her father's presence. Richard claimed he wanted to make up for lost years and participate in decisions about his daughter's university future. Margaret consulted attorney Michael, who analyzed the legal implications of the late paternal claim. "Mrs. Margaret, Grace is almost of legal age. She can decide for herself what kind of relationship she wants with her father." Grace was consulted about her feelings toward the absent father who was now claiming rights. "Mom, I don't hold any anger toward him, but I also don't feel he is really my father. You've been both father and mother to me all these years." Grace's emotional maturity impressed Margaret. Her daughter had processed the paternal situation in a healthy way, without bitterness but also without illusions. Grace decided to get to know Richard better, but established clear boundaries about expectations and future involvement. The meetings between father and daughter were cordial but distant. Grace perceived that Richard was more interested in the family's financial success than in a genuine relationship. The situation resolved itself naturally when Grace turned 18 and formalized her legal independence. She maintained sporadic contact with Richard, but without significant emotional commitments. Margaret watched her daughter's maturity with pride. Grace had learned to handle complex situations without letting herself be manipulated by emotional blackmail. The 18th year marked Grace's high school graduation with highest honors. She had been accepted to several prestigious universities, both in the United States and abroad. The graduation ceremony was emotional for Margaret. Seeing her daughter receive academic awards represented the fulfillment of dreams she didn't even know she had when Grace was born. Grace surprised everyone by announcing her decision during her speech as class valedictorian. "I was accepted to wonderful universities, but I've decided to study marine biology at Arizona State University. I want to study close to home, close to the waters that taught me to love science." Grace's decision to stay in the region moved Margaret deeply. It meant her daughter had chosen to honor her roots while pursuing her academic dreams. Margaret decided to fully support her daughter's choice, creating a specific fund to finance not only the undergraduate degree, but also any research projects Grace wanted to develop. The prospect of having Grace nearby during university allowed Margaret to plan a gradual transition of responsibilities in the business. Grace began to participate more actively in the company's strategic decisions, bringing a contemporary scientific perspective to methods Margaret had developed intuitively. The combination of Margaret's practical experience with Grace's theoretical knowledge created synergies that led to even more significant innovations. The 19th year was dedicated to consolidating everything Margaret had built. She systematized processes, documented knowledge, and established governance structures that would ensure continuity regardless of her presence. The Grace Foundation expanded to other countries in the Southwest region, establishing permanent training centers that multiplied the techniques developed in the Arizona desert. Grace began university, dividing her time between studies and increasing participation in the family business. She found ways to integrate academic projects with the company's practical challenges. One of Grace's university projects was to develop a mobile application that allowed monitoring water quality and fish health using simple sensors and accessible technology. The app was tested on Margaret's property and then distributed for free to all producers in the Sustainable Aquaculture Network of America. Grace's technological innovation caught the attention of specialized media, which began to follow her trajectory as a young scientist and future business leader. Margaret watched her daughter's development with profound satisfaction. Grace was building her own professional identity by respecting but not copying her mother's path. The 20th year brought special celebrations. Margaret completed 20 years since Richard's abandonment and 46 years of age. It was a time for reflection on the journey traveled, The property she had received as an unwanted inheritance now directly employed 50 people and indirectly influenced the lives of thousands through the network of partners. The celebration took the form of a regional sustainable aquaculture festival, bringing together producers, researchers, authorities, and the local community. Grace organized a photographic exhibition documenting the 20 years of transformation of the property and the region. The images showed the evolution from Margaret's early days, fishing in the hidden pond, to the modern research and production facilities. During the festival, Margaret was surprised by the presence of people who had marked her journey. Sarah, Professor Daniel, Attorney Michael, and even some of the first clients who had believed in her products. Mr. Walter, now 80 years old, was especially honored for having been a fundamental mentor in the most difficult times. "If it weren't for this extraordinary man, I would never have learned to fish, and none of this would exist today," said Margaret during her thank you speech. The tribute moved everyone present, highlighting the importance of supportive human relationships in building collective successes. Grace also spoke during the festival, representing the new generation of leaders trained in the philosophy of sustainability and social responsibility. "My mother taught me that true success is not measured only by money, but by the number of lives we manage to touch positively." Grace's words revealed that Margaret had succeeded in passing on solid values, along with technical knowledge and entrepreneurial vision. The 21st year marked the official leadership transition. Margaret moved to the position of board chair, while Grace assumed the executive direction of operations. The transition was gradual and well-planned. Grace had graduated with distinction in marine biology and completed a specialization in sustainable business management. Under Grace's leadership, the company developed more advanced technologies and expanded into new markets, always maintaining its commitment to sustainability and social responsibility. Margaret dedicated herself more intensively to work at the UN and other international organizations, becoming a global reference in sustainable rural development. The partnership between mother and daughter evolved into a respectful and productive professional collaboration. They combined experience and innovation in a complementary way. Grace implemented more sophisticated environmental monitoring systems and established partnerships with international universities for advanced research. Margaret remained focused on the human aspects of the business, mentoring new entrepreneurs and developing training programs for vulnerable communities. The division of responsibilities allowed both to maximize their specific contributions to the organization's sustainable growth. The 22nd year brought the highest international recognition. Margaret received a UN award for exceptional contributions to sustainable development. The ceremony in Geneva was attended by world leaders and representatives of development organizations from all continents. Grace accompanied her mother to the ceremony, proud to see the well-deserved recognition of a woman who had turned adversity into opportunity for thousands of people. During her acceptance speech, Margaret dedicated the award to all women who face seemingly impossible challenges but find the strength to persevere. "This award is not mine. It belongs to every mother struggling to feed her children, to every woman who refuses to accept limitations imposed by circumstances, to every person who believes they can make a difference in the world." Margaret's speech was broadcast globally and inspired support campaigns for rural entrepreneurs in various countries. The award brought international media attention, which Margaret strategically used to promote causes related to gender equity and rural sustainability. Grace took on a more proactive role in public communication, representing the new generation of leaders committed to innovative environmental solutions. The international exposure opened opportunities for even more ambitious projects. Margaret and Grace began to articulate the creation of a global institute for research in sustainable aquaculture. The institute would be headquartered in the Arizona desert, but would have partnerships with universities and research organizations from all continents. The prospect of transforming the region into a global center of excellence for sustainable aquaculture represented the culmination of Margaret's boldest dreams. The 23rd year was dedicated to the detailed planning of the International Institute. Margaret and Grace traveled extensively, establishing partnerships and securing resources. The complexity of the project required the development of diplomatic and international negotiation skills that Margaret had never imagined she would need. Grace proved especially talented at intercultural communication, facilitating understanding between researchers from vastly diverse backgrounds. The complementary skills of mother and daughter proved fundamental to the success of the international negotiations. Governments from several countries offered financial support for the project, recognizing its potential for global impact on food security and environmental sustainability. The Institute was officially established as an international non-profit organization, with Margaret as founding director and Grace as scientific director. The launch ceremony took place at the original property, symbolizing how local solutions can have a global impact when developed on a solid foundation of knowledge and social commitment. Representatives from 50 countries attended the ceremony, temporarily transforming the Arizona desert into the global center for sustainable aquaculture. The event was covered by international media as an example of how innovation can emerge from unlikely contexts and transform global realities. Margaret reflected on the journey from that morning of despair when Richard had abandoned her to the moment of worldwide recognition for her work. The transformation had been gradual but consistent, built on a solid foundation of values, hard work, and a genuine commitment to collective well-being. Grace represented the continuity of these values adapted to contemporary challenges, ensuring the family mission would transcend generations. The original property had become an international symbol of how individual determination can catalyze meaningful collective transformations. The 24th year was marked by the consolidation of the Institute and the implementation of the first international research projects. Young researchers from dozens of countries began arriving in the Arizona desert to develop doctoral projects in sustainable aquaculture. The cultural and scientific diversity transformed the region into a unique cosmopolitan environment where traditional desert knowledge combined with cutting-edge technology. Margaret adapted to the role of global mentor, guiding researchers who would take her adapted techniques to completely different contexts. Grace coordinated the technical aspects of the research, ensuring scientific rigor while maintaining a focus on the practical application of results. The first research results confirmed that the methods developed by Margaret could be successfully adapted to diverse climatic and cultural conditions. Pilot projects were established in 15 countries, each adapting the basic techniques to specific local conditions. The success of the pilot projects internationally validated the scientific approach based on empirical observation and practical experimentation that Margaret had pioneered. World development organizations began incorporating the Institute's methodologies into their programs to combat rural poverty and food insecurity. Margaret realized she had created something bigger than a successful business, a global movement of transformation based on sustainability and social inclusion. The 25th year marked a special celebration, a quarter century since the abandonment that had forced Margaret to discover her inner strength. The celebration was planned as an international congress, gathering all the partners, beneficiaries, and collaborators of the movement that had emerged in the desert. Grace organized a documentary about the journey of transformation, including testimonials from people whose lives had been impacted by her mother's work. The documentary revealed inspiring stories of women in different countries who had used Margaret's techniques to overcome situations of vulnerability. One of the interviewees was Mary Grace, Margaret's first collaborator, who now ran her own aquaculture training center. "Mrs. Margaret didn't just give me a job, she gave me hope and knowledge to transform my own life," said Mary in the documentary. The documented stories showed how genuine social impact multiplies through generations and crosses geographical and cultural borders. Margaret was moved to realize how her individual decisions had created waves of transformation that reached people she would never meet personally. During the Congress, the creation of a permanent fund to support rural women entrepreneurs was announced, funded by royalties from the methods developed by Margaret. The fund would ensure the continuity of the social mission, regardless of the physical presence of Margaret or Grace, institutionalizing the values that had motivated the entire journey. Grace announced her decision to dedicate her academic life to scientifically expanding her mother's methods, ensuring that empirical knowledge was preserved and developed. Grace's decision to pursue a scientific career while maintaining strategic business involvement represented a perfect synthesis between family tradition and academic innovation. Margaret felt fulfilled knowing she had created not only a sustainable business, but also an intellectual and social legacy that would transcend her own existence. The property where she had wept in despair 25 years earlier now received visitors from all over the world interested in learning about sustainability and social entrepreneurship. The hidden reservoir that had been her salvation had become an international scientific heritage, legally protected as a research reserve for sustainable aquaculture. Margaret established a detailed will, ensuring that the property and businesses would remain dedicated to the social mission, regardless of future decisions by heirs. The legal measures ensured that the values of sustainability, social inclusion, and community development would remain central to organizational operations. Grace fully supported her mother's decisions to institutionalize the social mission, demonstrating a deep alignment of values between generations. The 26th year brought a new personal twist. Margaret, at 52, found love again through a relationship with Professor Daniel. The relationship had evolved naturally from professional partnership to deep friendship, and finally to mature love based on shared values. Professor Daniel, a widower for 10 years, found in Margaret a companion who shared a passion for education, sustainability, and social development. Grace received her mother's relationship with joy, considering Professor Daniel a positive father figure who respected family autonomy. The wedding was celebrated at the property with a simple but meaningful ceremony that brought together an extended family of collaborators, partners, and friends. The union represented a personal completeness that complemented professional and social achievements, bringing an emotional balance that Margaret had not experienced for decades. Professor Daniel integrated naturally into the Institute's activities, contributing experience in environmental education and scientific project management. The marital partnership added a new dimension to Margaret's work, combining complementary expertise that strengthened the educational impact of the initiatives. Grace gained an additional mentor in Professor Daniel, who guided specialized academic projects and expanded the network of international scientific contacts. The family reconstituted based on mature choice and shared values contrasted dramatically with the previous relationship based on dependency and immaturity. Margaret reflected on how personal growth had made it possible to recognize and build a healthy relationship based on mutual respect and common goals. The emotional stability provided by the marriage allowed Margaret to dedicate herself even more intensely to projects with global social impact. The 27th year marked the official inauguration of the Institute's international campus with world-class research facilities built in the Arizona desert. The campus included advanced laboratories, a convention center, residences for researchers, and an educational visitor center open to the public. The construction used sustainable technologies and a design that respected the climatic and cultural characteristics of the region, serving as a model for responsible development. Grace coordinated the technical aspects of the construction, ensuring the facilities met the needs of contemporary research without compromising environmental values. Margaret focused on the human and social aspects, ensuring the expansion benefited the local community through skilled jobs and educational opportunities. The inauguration was attended by ministers of education and development from various countries, consolidating the project's international recognition. Scientific cooperation agreements were signed with universities from 5 continents, establishing a permanent network for collaborative research. The Institute became a world reference not only in aquaculture, but in a development model that combines scientific excellence with social responsibility. Margaret received an honorary doctorate in sustainable development from an international university, recognizing her practical contributions to applied science. The title represented formal academic recognition for knowledge that had been developed through practical experience and empirical observation. Grace defended her master's thesis on adaptation of traditional aquaculture techniques for contemporary contexts, based on her mother's work. The thesis was acclaimed as an original contribution that scientifically systematized empirical methods, making them replicable globally. Professor Daniel guided the development of an educational program that brought the Institute's knowledge to rural schools throughout the Southwest region. The educational program democratized access to information on sustainability and entrepreneurship, multiplying the potential for social impact. Margaret observed the expansion of her mission through multiple channels, ensuring the knowledge developed reached diverse audiences through appropriate approaches. The diversification of educational and scientific strategies ensured the robustness and permanence of the movement begun at the Hidden Reservoir. The 28th year was dedicated to the complete systematization of all knowledge developed throughout the transformation journey. Margaret worked with a team of writers and researchers to produce a complete encyclopedia of sustainable aquaculture based on her experience. The work included not only specific techniques, but also a development philosophy that prioritized community well-being over maximum profit. Grace coordinated the scientific aspects of the encyclopedia, ensuring technical accuracy and updating with the latest research. Professor Daniel supervised the pedagogical aspects, ensuring the content was accessible to audiences with different educational levels. The encyclopedia was published simultaneously in 8 languages, democratizing access to knowledge that had transformed thousands of lives. Adapted versions were developed for different cultural contexts, respecting regional specificities while maintaining fundamental principles. The encyclopedia launch was accompanied by a global literacy campaign on rural sustainability, reaching remote communities across all continents. Margaret established that royalties from the encyclopedia would permanently fund educational programs for vulnerable populations. This decision ensured that commercialized knowledge would return directly to the communities that would benefit most from its application. International humanitarian organizations adopted the encyclopedia as a reference manual for sustainable rural development projects. The institutional recognition validated the holistic approach that combined efficient production with social and environmental responsibility. Margaret realized she had created a body of knowledge that transcended personal experience, becoming intellectual heritage for humanity. The complete systematization ensured that lessons learned in the Arizona desert would be available for future generations, regardless of individual circumstances. The 29th year marked a transition to a phase of consolidation and autonomous multiplication of the developed initiatives. Margaret gradually reduced direct operational involvement, focusing on strategic mentorship and institutional representation at international forums. Grace assumed full responsibility for scientific and operational management, demonstrating administrative maturity that ensured continuity without disruptions. Professor Daniel expanded educational programs to include training multipliers who would bring knowledge to regions not yet reached. The generational transition was planned and executed in a way that preserved quality and social mission while allowing innovation and adaptation to contemporary contexts. Margaret dedicated herself to writing memoirs that would document the personal and emotional aspects of the transformation journey. The memoirs would complement the technical documentation of the encyclopedia with a human narrative that would inspire future generations of social entrepreneurs. The personal perspective would reveal how individual determination can catalyze collective transformations when based on solid values and genuine commitment. Grace contributed to the memoirs with chapters about growing up in a social entrepreneurship environment and developing environmental awareness. Professor Daniel added analyses on the educational and scientific aspects of the experience, contextualizing innovations within the contemporary academic landscape. The collaborative work would represent a complete synthesis of the experience from multiple perspectives, offering lessons for diverse, interested audiences. Margaret established a schedule of lectures and conferences that would bring the message of personal and social transformation to global audiences. The lectures would focus on motivational and inspirational aspects, demonstrating that adverse circumstances can be transformed into opportunities for growth. The lecture circuit would be complemented by practical workshops where participants would learn basic sustainable entrepreneurship techniques. The combination of inspiration and practical training would maximize the impact of the presentations, generating effective changes in participants' lives. Grace developed a digital and interactive version of the maternal presentations, reaching audiences who could not attend in-person events. The digitization democratized access to the inspirational messages, multiplying the potential impact through contemporary technological platforms. The 30th year brought a special celebration. 3 decades of transformation that had begun with abandonment and despair. The celebration was organized as an international festival of sustainable social entrepreneurship, gathering success stories from all continents. Margaret was honored as a pioneer of a movement that had inspired thousands of similar initiatives in diverse cultural contexts. Grace presented research documenting the quantified impact of maternal techniques on food security and global rural poverty reduction. The numbers revealed that adaptations of Margaret's methods had directly benefited over 100,000 families in 40 countries. Professor Daniel coordinated a scientific symposium that systematized academic contributions derived from the original experience in the Arizona desert. The symposium consolidated recognition of Margaret's original scientific contribution to the development of knowledge in sustainable aquaculture. During the celebration, the creation of the International Margaret Thompson Award for Rural Social Entrepreneurs in Developing Countries was announced. The award would be funded by a permanent endowment and would offer recognition and financial support to women who replicated the model of social transformation. The institutionalization of this recognition ensured that Margaret's legacy would formally inspire future generations of leaders in sustainable development. Representatives of international organizations signed a declaration committing to incorporate principles developed by Margaret into rural development policies. The declaration represented formal recognition that the empirical approach had generated valid and applicable knowledge on a global scale. Margaret reflected on the journey that had transformed personal necessity into a global movement for transformation based on sustainability and social inclusion. This reflection revealed that each challenge overcome had strengthened her determination and expanded her vision of the possibilities for positive impact in the world. Grace expressed gratitude for having grown up in an environment that valued both personal achievement and social responsibility, shaping a balanced character. Professor Daniel highlighted how the family partnership had created a model of intergenerational collaboration that maximized individual contributions to collective goals. The extended family of collaborators, partners, and beneficiaries represented a global community united by shared values and a commitment to positive transformation. Margaret realized she had managed to create something greater than a successful business, a sustainable movement for transformation that would continue to grow autonomously. The success had been built on a solid foundation of authenticity, hard work, and a consistent focus on collective benefit over personal gain. The authenticity of the mission had attracted genuinely committed collaborators, creating an organizational culture that perpetuated core values. The hard work had established credibility and demonstrated the practical viability of the developed approaches, earning the trust of diverse stakeholders. The focus on collective benefit had generated genuine social impact that justified and sustained international recognition and support. Margaret understood that she had discovered and applied a formula for sustainable transformation that combined innovation, persistence, and social responsibility. The formula was not theoretically complex, but required courage, discipline, and genuine commitment to be applied consistently over decades. Grace had absorbed and modernized this formula, ensuring that fundamental principles would be preserved while methods would be adapted for contemporary contexts. Professor Daniel had contributed scientific rigor and an educational structure that formalized and multiplied the original empirical knowledge. The tripartite collaboration represented an ideal synthesis of practical experience, generational innovation, and academic systematization to maximize social impact. Margaret decided to dedicate her remaining years to mentoring new leaders who would replicate the transformation model in contexts not yet reached. The mentorship would include both technical aspects and the character development necessary to lead sustainable social changes. Grace would gradually assume full responsibility for operations, applying contemporary scientific knowledge to expand the efficiency and reach of the initiatives. Professor Daniel would continue developing educational aspects, ensuring that knowledge was effectively transmitted to future generations. The strategic distribution of responsibilities maximized individual contributions while ensuring the continuity and sustainable growth of the collective mission. Margaret observed with satisfaction that she had created a resilient organizational structure that transcended dependence on any specific individual. The organizational resilience guaranteed that the social impact would continue growing even in the face of changes in leadership or external circumstances. The model developed in the Arizona desert had become an international reference for sustainable social entrepreneurship based on local innovation. The transformation of personal tragedy into a global movement of positive change represented a powerful demonstration of human potential to overcome adversity. Margaret knew the story was not finished, but entering a new phase where others would take the lead in continuing the mission of social transformation. End of story. So, dear listener, what did you think of Margaret's incredible journey? Can you imagine such strength and determination? Tell us in the comments which part of the story moved you the most. If you know any warrior woman like Margaret, share her story too. Don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories like this one. Your participation is very important to us.